reductions if you are to decrease that supply by 400 megalitres as you suggest? And also, where are we losing the bulk of the water? How much is lost to leaks? If currently we're getting 1.7 roughly megalitres per day, how much is lost to leaks? So do we have a leakage problem, essentially? And then also on the Commando system, Westbury residents yesterday who were protesting suggest that these issues, as you mentioned, they emanate from the 17th of November, that maintenance that was done by City Power, but they say these have been ongoing for years. They've had these water holes for years where they get supply of water from 1 a.m. and it's most likely cut off by 3 a.m. What are the actual problems in these areas? As they suggest, just a street away in Slovo, they get free water supply which is uninterrupted continuously there, and they don't pay for their water. So what are the actual problems in Westbury and Coronation Hall, and how soon will they have adequate running water?
Hi, thanks for organizing this meeting. My name is Julia, I'm from Daily Maverick. So the first question I have is around the ring fencing. So the Joburg City Council approved as part of the turnaround strategy for Joburg Water to ring fence revenues. So I just wanted to ask about that. So from my understanding, but please correct me if I'm wrong, I think about 12 billion goes towards the City of Joburg from water and sanitation bills. But Joburg Water said in the past that they only get 1 billion from the city. So with this new ring fencing strategy, is there going to be more money directed towards Joburg Water? Because in the past you said you need 3 billion. And how does that work? Can you just give some more details about the ring fencing in simple terms, because it's been kind of vague, and I think that's really important. And then in terms of fixing the leaks, how many teams are on the ground in each region? And then I wanted to ask, why was there a sit-in strike in the Joburg Water team proposed from the security teams, I think last week Friday and on Monday? Was it because they're not being paid, or what was the issue? Thanks.
Thank you.
Nathan here from Netwerk Feeding Winter. I just want to get an indication of how many leaks were fixed in the past 6 months or so. And then as my colleague also mentioned now, the security risk to your team, is that a real risk? Are you being intimidated on the ground? What's happening with that situation? Thank you.
Thanks. I think we will take responses and then we'll go for another round if there are more questions.
Okay. Thank you for those questions, colleagues. So in terms of the comms updates, I think my colleague from the comms department can refer to that particular question. There was a question, Mdila, from the water reduction in terms of going to the licensing agreement. So yes, remember our short-term plan is in terms of our water restrictions. We have a water restriction schedule which we close or throttle certain reservoirs or certain key distribution high demand areas within the network to reduce that demand. We focus heavily in terms of our physical leak detection so that we can repair leaks and obviously repair them accordingly, similarly with bursts. In the main, it's guided by certain flagship projects. Like I mentioned, we have a water conservation, water demand strategy. Part of that is pressure management, which I alluded to, the smart controllers and the noise loggers, where we're using smart technology, and we started that process already, so that is one of our mitigations. The other process is aligned to the leaking reservoirs, like I mentioned, but that's more a medium to long-term initiative. And then obviously, the response times, increasing our response times to bursts and leaks, and responding more quickly to isolate these bursts to reduce water. Further to that, you'll notice that we've focused a lot in terms of credit control and bylaw enforcement. We've accelerated that quite a bit. I did allude to the hijacked and bad buildings, the disconnection of illegal connections on our pipelines, amongst others, and obviously the metering and revenue collection from customers. So all of these in the main are the main projects or the main initiatives we as Joburg Water have in place to make sure that we are curbing demand. It is not a singular approach. It consists of various flagship projects, like I've mentioned, And through these projects, we intend to reduce those particular demands. One must also appreciate that infrastructure upgrades in terms of pipe replacement, in terms of reservoir structural repairs, they take time. So it's not a quick fix solution on that. Our so-called immediate plans, which I've mentioned to, i.e. pressure management, using smart technology in terms of noise loggers and smart controllers, improving our response times, turnaround times, isolation of bursts, leak detections, credit control, disconnections, are what we're aiming for to reduce that in the short term, followed by the long-term initiatives. In terms of the water losses, just a high-level figure, in the 23-24 financial year, we have 46.2% non-revenue water. Now, 46.2%, when I say non-revenue water, is not the physical loss of water. It's a combination of physical loss. It's a combination of commercial loss. Commercial loss is typically your billing-related or meter errors, etc. And obviously unmetered, unbilled connections, like your flushing of hydrants and mains, etc. in the network to affect burst repairs or to charge lines. But to answer your question, the physical loss component, where water is physically lost through bursts and leaks in pipelines and to an extent leaking structures, is roughly 24%. In terms of the ongoing issues in the Commando system, I did allude to that. The Commando system issue is one of our most sensitive in our system. So any small interruptions of supply has a ripple effect in that it takes a long time, days, in some cases a week to recover, through reconfiguration of systems and through the initiatives in terms of throttling and closures of high demands. That is why we now have initiated our medium to long-term plans in terms of improving the capacity of infrastructure in that supply zone. So yes, it's not a new issue, it's an ongoing issue for a while, but we have these plans like I've displayed to make sure that we have a bit of a more stronger supply, a continuity of supply going forward. But we must also be mindful, in that system, there's a lot of there is old infrastructure, but there's a lot of practices, i.e. where 3-bedroom houses have been demolished and stands have been consolidated, and student accommodation has taken up. Backyard dwellings have just appeared because people are supplementing their incomes. So the density of population in that particular supply zone, noting our educational institutes are in the close vicinity, comprises a lot of densely populated areas where previously you would have a family of 5 or 6 people. Now, because they've built student accommodation, you have 200. It doesn't just put a strain on the water network, it puts a strain on the sewer network as well. So in the main, we must also appreciate that there's also external issues that contribute to that, in addition to illegal connections and certain cases where we have credit control issues where there's a reluctance or non-payment of services. But in the main, it relates to that. In terms of ring-fencing the revenue, MD will talk to that later on. In terms of fixing leaks, yes, we have 6 operational regions within Johannesburg Water. They vary from north, south, east, and west. They are physical depots that are resourced with human resources as well as plant and machinery. We have dedicated water teams, that means teams that fix bursts and leaks. They are also supported by specialist teams like fitters and welders and electricians that support them in terms of the electromechanical repairs or the valve maintenance and repairs. There's a large complements. There's in excess, if you look at just water teams, we're looking at in excess of about 30 teams in some cases 40 teams minimum that we have, because some of them are multi-skilled teams that don't just fix, they also do meters and connections. They also assist with isolation and they do repairs. So we have quite a large number of repair teams. The challenge we sit is you can't have everyone on duty at once. You need to obviously schedule your operations and plan your work, and that is what we started to do to capacitate us a bit more going forward. In terms of the security strike, I think the MD can talk about that as well. And there was, Brayton, you had a question, how many leaks we've repaired in the last 3 months? Look, on an average, I think you caught me off guard, so I can't go into the system now and give you an exact figure. But on an average, in terms of burst repairs and leaks repairs, we're looking at an average of about 2,000 to 2,200 on an average, right, per month. That's a combination of major bursts on pipelines, a combination of minor bursts, as well as leaking valves and connections that we fix. So remember, we have a very large water network, one of the largest. We've got about probably over 12,000 kilometers of water pipeline. And we've got quite a fleet of reservoirs and pump stations as well added to that. So, and we must be considered that the aged infrastructure in the form of AC pipes and steel pipes is also needs to be replaced as well. That contributes to it. Thank you.
Can I take Alex's question? Because you mentioned besides this platform and besides our social media platforms, particularly for councillors. So as Logan mentioned, we have regionalized WhatsApp groups for councillors. And this week on Tuesday, before this briefing with the media, councillors were briefed by Logan and his team on the current problem. So we also have regular councillor forums, and during crisis, we have as and when required councillor engagements where they engage with Johannesburg Water leadership. So there is that process as well with councillors as part of our stakeholder engagement. And councillors also have access to our depot managers and have access to stakeholder relations specialists as well. Thanks. Any other questions?
Okay, yeah. So,
I'm sorry.
there are a few questions that I just need to add and also cover the question on trading services. Maybe to add also on this question that Nombuso was answering, there is a drive that we are even doing through our MMC where we are having a meeting with councillors. We started having a meeting with all the councillors for Soweto, where in that meeting, of course, we're taking them through the whole issue of water conservation, water demand management, because the idea also is for councillors to assist us in mobilizing communities through really the response that we want to help us with. You'll recall that we always say this type of challenge that we have, as much as there are work that we need to do from the infrastructure point of view, we can't solve it only through the infrastructure. It requires also the aspects of water conservation, which then requires the community. Above that, there are issues around the stakeholder engagement, which will be happening. There is a meeting that's even being arranged with the business chamber and so on. So there will be a series of stakeholder engagement that will be happening, which some of them will be driven by MMC. Just to add also on the issue around, reduction in demand, to say, what does it mean? What are we in for? Of course, our main priority is really to make sure that through technical intervention, through water conservation, we are able really to get to the levels that we are aiming. And the first one being 1,500. We need to be making sure that we are getting to 1,500 from January to June. So that's our immediate goal that we have. And we want to make sure that we get through that mainly through those two initiatives that I've spoken about. So the issue of the level of restriction increasing, it will only come in if, of course, we are not seeing the results that we expect from the in technical as well as the water conservation initiatives as it stands. I must indicate that as part probably of the progress that we must share with you, we assess this thing on weekly basis to say, are we seeing results based on what we are doing? I must say we've seen some indicative that we are going on the right path. Of course, we just need to make sure that we are doing much more. You'll have noticed that in the presentation, we said that our demand in the last financial year has been the region of 1,750 megaliters per day. The last 3 weeks, don't know if maybe you notice on the graph, the last 3 weeks have been seeing a demand of about 1,600. In fact, there are other week where it was even below 1,600, but average, call it 1,600. So it is 1,600 because, of course, these initiatives that are being implemented. But we need to do much more so that we sustain that 1,600 into December. And then ultimately, when we go into January, we need to be working on making sure that we are taking that demand down to 1,500. That's our main goal, so that we can be able to have a proper response through the current initiative. And of course, if the current initiative will get to a point where we're not satisfied with the results, that's when the issue of the increasing the level of restriction will come in. And as Logan indicated, there are protocols for that, where it will have to go through certain governance processes. Maybe before I get to the trading services, let me just add also on the issue of Commando. You're quite right. Commando system have been experiencing challenges for a few years now. And that's precisely the reason why the City of Johannesburg is going to invest almost R1 billion in that area only. R1 billion of the projects that Logan presented. The reason being, it's a weaknesses on the current bulk infrastructure. It's not able to function the way it used to. For a simple reason, right now when the demand and supply is a challenge, basically when the demand is stripping supply, you end up with the reservoirs upstream being lower rather than that being, in terms of the level, being at the normal operating level. When the reservoirs are at normal operating level, you are able to push enough water, you're able to pressurize all the line and have the sufficient volume that you require. Right now, after the maintenance that Logan spoken about, on the 17th, the reservoirs upstream, even from the bulk supplier, of course because of the demand and so on, they've been struggling to get to the sufficient level. And when they're not getting to sufficient level, we're not able to get the volume through, because that line really, there's no pump station, it's just rely on gravity based on the level of the reservoir. So hence we have to do those investments to say, even when the levels of reservoirs overall are low, that system should be able to get water like any other system that gets water in the city. And it will be able to get water through because we'll be above the issue of the bulk line that we are going to construct. We are going to construct even a pump station, where Hastile now, the water that gets to Hastile will get through the pump station, will be pumping, rather than relying on gravity feed. So those are some of the changes that will need to happen, but changes through the investment that we need to do to make sure that that system operates better. So on the issue of trading services, this is now the ring fencing of the water revenue. I must start by indicating that you may be aware that municipalities in the main get their sources of income, or have 4 sources of income: water, electricity, solid waste, as well as the rates. Of course, there is a reform that's are happening across the country, specifically focusing on 8 metros, whereby the National Treasury have issued a directive which says that the water business needs to be treated differently in the metros in such a way that the resources that are generated from the water business in metros, they need to be invested back in the water infrastructure. Whereas historically, the resources that come from water, of course, they go into the general accounts that are utilized for all various businesses of the municipality. So going forward, the resources that are generated from the sales of water services, they are going to be ring-fenced with the aim of that a good portion of it gets invested back into water. So with that initiative, what we expect, there are 2 things. Of course, it will be able to increase the level of capital investment, the level of budget for maintenance that we need to be able to do in Johannesburg, through the ring fencing. But the second aspect, of course, is the issue that these trading reforms have incentives from National Treasury. The metro that will be implementing these, implementing them correctly, they'll get incentive in the form of allocation for capital budget, which then you can begin to use it to improve your own infrastructure. So it's a program that we are really looking forward as Johannesburg Water and the City of Johannesburg, where, as you said, we submitted our a business plan that was approved by Council in it was June, July, and that business plan has been approved, or the turnaround plan has been approved by National Treasury. And now we are into the next stage where we are waiting for feedback around the investment plan which was submitted, because part of it, because it's got various elements, part of it is that the metros, we need to invest in water infrastructure, invest correctly. For the City of Johannesburg, the example that I can give you, the aim of that turnaround plan is that we need to be able to move within the next 2 years or so from a level of about 1 billion rand in terms of capital investment to a level of about 3 billion rand, because that's what's required in order for us to be able to make sure that the infrastructure is performing correctly. The question around the security strike.
Sorry, just real quick though. So how much money does just wood and sanitation give to the city? So how much money specifically now will be ring-fenced for Joburg Water? Do you know that figure?
So we are an 18 billion rand business, roughly 18 billion rand business in terms of revenue. Joburg Water, 18 billion rand business in terms of revenue. We post surpluses of about 1.3 billion or so, 1.3, 1.4 billion per annum surpluses. But as I said, currently the arrangements that have been there historically is not necessarily for full ring fencing. The full ring fencing is only what's going to happen going forward. Which that full ring fencing, of course, it doesn't necessarily mean that, of course, every rand will have to come back to Joburg Water. There will need to be rules, because at the end of the day, there will need to be a system like, for instance, whereby there are clear dividends that are expected by shareholder to say, shareholder may say that Johannesburg Water, we expect you to give us, say, 500 million rand a year. The rest needs to be invested back. So that's the advantage that we'll be bringing, to say the resources that come from water, they won't necessarily be going into a general account for everything else that happen in a metro. It will be ring-fenced, but for us that are an entity, of course, there need to be an agreement around what form of dividend the shareholder will require. For of course, as I indicated earlier, there are 4 streams that make sure that municipality function. And as you know, municipality's duty is much more than the 4 function. So moving
All right, live visuals there that you are watching from Newtown. Speaking there was Ntraveni Mukwebo, the Managing Director of Rand Water, outlining a whole range of issues. But in the main, this media briefing was around responding to the myriad of water-related challenges plaguing mostly the Commando system. And that essentially feeds a number of areas, including Westbury and Coronationville, who have been in the news over the past 48 hours. And many others, by the way, extending all the way to Auckland Park, for example. In fact, officials there from Joburg Water saying the Commando system is the most sensitive. It's been plagued with issues for years, and that's why they're looking at intervening by investing about 1 billion rand over some time through a number of interventions, projects, if you like, mainly aimed at improving maintenance. I'll take you through it very quickly. They're focusing on isolated bursts, in fact, hoping to respond to these from 48 hours now, bring it down to 24 hours, bringing on smart controllers and noise loggers, they say, which will be used to detect leakages, even the ones we can't see with the naked eye or hear with the human ear. They've also targeted about 20 hijacked buildings over the past 20 buildings over the past 2 weeks, which they say they've essentially disconnected because of the leakages that were happening there. They're also hoping to bring down consumption. It was on average at about 1,750 megalitres per day, down ultimately to 1,500 megalitres. We're currently on 1,600. We've got a reporter at that briefing for you who, without a doubt, will continue to distill some of the main points to take from that, especially given the uproar we've seen in places like Westbury and Coronationville over the past 2 days.